Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so today we're going to be talking about primarily trusted identity, but also computable consents and how that will enable the FHIR API. My name is Nancy Lush from Patient-Centric Solutions, and I'll be presenting with Celeste Jones from ID.me. Excuse me, So we're talking, I would like to give you a little bit of an introduction on trusted identity and why it's important to what we're trying to achieve. So we all kind of share this common objective of secure, private, seamless health data exchange. We want that data to easily flow so that it's always available when needed. And we've talked a lot about the many benefits of a patient record traveling with a patient. Kind of want to open up that faucet and just let the data flow. But we need to do this securely while also protecting patient privacy. Ultimately, we need to build that bridge to trust, patient trust and provider trust. So a critical building block is federated trusted identity, and that's what we're going to be discussing, how we can enable that today. So even relatively healthy patients need to see providers across different healthcare facilities. Too often, it's not easy to have access to the medical record at a new point of care. This is the PASSIO CMS slide depicting a Medicare/Medicaid patient, perhaps with multiple chronic conditions, traveling from facility to facility. There's a lack of accurate data available at each facility to properly inform care, leading to adverse outcomes, additional expenses, and increased burden. It's critical that we enable clinical data to flow across that continuum of care. So what are the building blocks of seamless data exchange? Certainly the FHIR APIs, and I think it's pretty well understood and accepted today that this is a core building block, and many of us have been long involved in these and really see this as a major underpinning to our new future of exchanging healthcare data. But it's also about standards and implementation guides, and certainly our PASSIO work group has been working diligently in that area. But it includes security protocols, electronic directories, computable consents, and then trusted identities. So these latter two will be kind of the focus of our discussion today. So this is a little older slide, but we can see that our PASSIO information flows from facility to facility with that clinical data managed via, or exchanged via that data manager hub. If you look at these as separate entities, let's start with a hospital. So typically a hospital has its own identity provider. So all of the users within that hospital tend to get authenticated by one system, and they don't have any problem accessing data or getting authenticated. But the SNF also has their own trusted identity, and the long-term care facility has their identity provider, as does the home healthcare system. So when we try to exchange data from one facility to another, users at the other facility just aren't known at other facilities, and it becomes more complicated when you may have a primary care provider traveling from facility to facility to provide support to a particular patient. So with a shared identity provider, the authentication can be shared across systems, and this is easier both for healthcare systems and providers. So we've added a concept of a federated trusted identity provider or trusted authentication system to our data hub and our PASSIO story. This is a required function in order for each of the separate facilities or healthcare systems to trust that the users are indeed who they say they are. So now I'd like to introduce Celeste Jones from ID.me, and she'll be doing a presentation and demo about secure and efficient digital authentication.
Go ahead and share my screen. Perfect. Yeah, so like Nancy said, I'm Celeste. I work at a company called ID.me, and what ID.me is at our core is a digital identity verification solution. And the problem that we're looking to solve is that digital identity is broken. So in the past, you have identities that exist that are portable and digital, but not necessarily trusted. So something like a Facebook or Google login. And that's because those are advertising companies. And then you have identities that exist that are digital and trusted, but not really portable. So something like something like a bank login can't be used across anywhere else in the internet, but pretty good sense that I am Celeste Jones when I log into my bank. And so what IDme has done is look to exist in the crossroads of these, giving users a both portable and digital trusted identity that they can use across our network. And so it's, and we found that through research with the Pew research shows that users have an average of over 200 unique logins. And as the world continues to become more digital and goes to the internet economy, that number is expected to grow to over 400. And so like myself, 86% of Americans rely on just their memory to remember those passwords. So even if we come up with a solution for the password problem, that still doesn't fix the identity problem. With more industries going onto the online, individuals will only have to prove their identity more and more times, like specific to the healthcare space, like Nancy was saying, each time they interact with a new player in the healthcare space. So IDme is looking to fix this solution or find a solution for this problem. And let me hop out of here and walk you through a quick demo. So IDme is a certified identity provider to the NIST standards. And I have a video with my chief product officer explaining why this is important and why industries need to adhere to the NIST standards.
Identity is a utility that establishes trust in a relationship or in a transaction. Think about a citizen to government interaction. The risk of fraud is immense, so there are legal and security and privacy implications. It's very important to establish identity in a robust manner so that the transactions online can happen with the trust that it deserves. Online identity proofing isn't that straightforward or easy. When you're in a physical face-to-face interaction, establishing who you are is easy. But when you go online, it gets harder. The National Institutes of Standards and Technology set forth digital identity guidelines. IDme is a credential service provider, and we've got our products and our processes certified against the NIST 863-3, which are the gold standards. The process essentially involves collecting a few pieces of data from the individual and then verifying that against sources to confirm that what information is being asserted is indeed accurate. So these things put together is what helps establish individuals' identity online. Trust and privacy, they're the hallmark of the relationship between IDme and our members. Our members entrust us with their data, and they control how IDme uses the data. They provide explicit consent for IDme to share their information with any of our partners that request it to offer them benefits and services. IDme never sells anyone's data, and even the sharing of a member's data is with their explicit consent.
Right, so like my chief product officer, Pradeep, was saying, building trust not only among the users of their identity interactions, but also our partners. And so what IDme has done is given individuals that portable identity. So if you think about it similar to PayPal, they only have to verify once, and then once they've been verified up to the level of assurance that's required for that particular action, they can simply just use their IDme account to quickly authenticate or quickly prove that they are in fact who they say they are. So it saves a bunch of time for not only the user, but also for our partners when individuals don't have to continually verify, especially if it's someone that has trouble verifying through a self-service manner, which I'll talk to a little bit more in a second here. But we have built a network of over 35 million pre-verified individuals, growing at about 70,000 new users each day. And this just shows that not only are partners looking for a solution to make it easier for their users to verify, but it's also receptive among the US citizens. So with growth that exciting and that fast, it's great to see it really taking off from an end user perspective as well. And so we work across a number of different industries, anywhere from the federal government to the state and local government. We work in the consumer retail space for like group discounts like nurses, military, medical professionals. And then we also work in the healthcare and financial services. And so specific to the healthcare space, we work both on the provider and on the patient side of things. The provider side, we partner with Allscripts, Change Healthcare, Dr. First, Practice Fusion to verify providers' identities and then enable them to do EPCS, so prescribed controlled substances. And then on the patient side of things, verifying that patient so that they can securely access their health records. So what's cool here is that if someone maybe goes to the Social Security Administration and is looking to access their benefits, verifies with ID.me, and then comes to one of our other partners, they've already been verified. They'll just simply log in, much less friction for that end user. And so to give an example of one of our larger partners in the patient proofing space, ID.me partners with the VA. So the VA .gov had a huge problem from lots of disjointed sort of systems put together across the extent of their time online. And so what ID.me did is consolidate those logins into one trusted identity provider, verifying through ID.me. So any veteran that's looking to log on to the VA, access their benefits, or access their health records will verify with ID.me. And so we have a really flexible solution. So the idea here is that you want to balance the level of assurance with the level of friction to get the policy that's going to be best for your particular use case. So we have a range of different solutions, anywhere from like a one piece of verification, which we call KBA replacement, all the way up to the legal digital identity, or that NIST 863-3 IAL2 that Pradeep was talking about in that video. And so pop out of here and walk you through a quick demo. The first one I'll show you is an individual that's verifying with ID.me for the first time to IAL2, just so you can see what that workflow looks like. And I'll touch a little bit about how we actually verify.
Automated self-service enrollment process at NIST's IAL2 AAL2 standard for a new user creating an account using ID.me. We have designed the customer experience to minimize the level of effort required by the end user to verify their identity. The 5 easy steps to set up an ID.me account typically only take a few minutes. All the user will need is an accessible email account and a mobile phone that can take photos. They'll also need to take a selfie and upload a picture of a government-issued ID. New users will see the option to either sign in using their existing login, sign in using ID.me, or create an account with ID.me. For this demonstration, we'll assume the user doesn't have an existing account with your agency or ID.me. First, users will need to enter their email address. Next, they'll click a link in the email to confirm their ownership of the email address. In accordance with NIST 863B, users will set up multi-factor authentication to ensure that all their information stays secure in the unlikely event their email and password are compromised. ID.me offers users several options for multi-factor authentication. Users can get an SMS-based one-time password, or use the mobile app to receive a push notification, or a time-based one-time password. Alternatively, they can use a hardware or mobile token, such as YubiKey. ID.me also gives users the option to generate a backup recovery code in case they are away from the device they used for MFA or lose access to their accounts. With the account created and secured, the user will choose one of several methods to verify their identity. They can submit a photo of either their driver's license, state ID, passport, or passport card. Users can upload photos of their documents from their computers if they already have them on file, or take new photos with their mobile phone. Behind the scenes, ID.me first confirms that the documents are legitimate and have not been tampered with, and then abstracts the key data fields needed to perform identity proofing using computer vision. In accordance with NIST 863A, users are also asked to submit a selfie. ID.me will match the selfie to the photo on the government ID to provide biometric verification of the user's identity. Once these steps are complete, users enter their social security number. ID.me requires a social security number to uniquely resolve a user's identity and match their information against authoritative data sources, such as utility or financial records. This also ensures that there is only one verified ID.me account per user. Once the user confirms their information, they will give their consent to share their data with your agency. We use a privacy by design model, where the user retains control of what information is shared and with whom. If they do not choose to send their data, they will not be able to use their verified credential at your site. After the user clicks Allow, the process is complete. With their ID.me account, they will be able to quickly log in to your site as well as other ID.me partnered websites.
Well, and so one thing I wanted to highlight here that isn't shown in this video is when we're on the consent screen and the end user is consenting to release that information back to you as the partner. Let me find that here. We also will pass back in that payload of data a unique identifier. So especially in the patient space, with patient matching being such a pain point, that way you can actually take that UUID, associate it with that specific individual, know that they are in fact that person because they've been verified, and use that UUID to track that patient across interactions across the healthcare space. So sort of an additional benefit there with that verified identity.
If they do not choose to.
And so just quickly here, what I'll show you is one last thing, and from a demo perspective, is just showing an end user that's been pre-verified by ID.me and how easy it is for them to prove their identity once that they've completed that first time verification. So they would simply click sign in, enter an email and password. Usually the cookies are saved, makes it even easier. They'll be prompted for multi-factor authentication according to the NIST standards. And then if it's a new interaction with a partner, they'll consent to release that information, and then they'll be successfully verified. So really straightforward in terms of individuals that have been pre-verified, try to make it easy as possible for the end user. And so, of course, what I just walked you through is that NIST 863-3 or IAL2 verification. So our most common way to verify is that demo that I just showed through our online self-service flow. But I'm sure probably a lot of you are thinking, that seems pretty involved for a way for people to verify, there must be some fall off. And so ID.me has a couple of different solutions built in to help individuals verify. The first is that we're a credential provider, so we have multiple different authoritative data sources built into our solution. So for instance, if someone has recently changed their last name, been married, and it hasn't updated with the credit bureaus, if it fails through our first credit bureau ping, it'll automatically fall over to our second authoritative data source to ensure the highest level of success for self-service flow. If an individual is unable to verify their identity through the self-service flow, maybe they have been unbanked and they don't have any credit history or don't exist in the credit bureaus, we have built out a solution that's been certified by NIST called Virtual In-Person Identity Proofing. And so what that entails basically prompts the end user to set up a video call with one of our team members that sits in our office in Northern Virginia. We call them trusted referees. So they schedule a FaceTime, Zoom, or Google Hangout video session with that trusted referee to verify their identity virtually, but in person. So it saves a ton of time for the end user not having to then go in person, and of course saves a ton of time from a call center perspective, outsourcing all of that customer support or customer verification to ID.me directly. And so like mentioned in the video there, it's important to have an MFA policy put in place or multi-factor authentication put in place to ensure that if an account was ever compromised, if someone's email and password was guessed or stolen, the end user will still have to authenticate to get access to that health record. I was looking the other day and saw a stat that a social security number will go for about $25 on the dark web, whereas a health record will go for over $1,000. And just thinking about sort of the fraud that happens and the day-to-day basis, that's a huge risk for not only the users but also you as a healthcare company. And so because when they steal that health record, not only does it have their full name, their date of birth, their social, usually their last 3 addresses, but all of their health information as well that can be used against them. So it's definitely very important to protect that information using identity verification. And so we want to make sure that the end users still have control over that data, especially to be able to consent to release it. They have the exact idea of who has their information. They can always log into their ID.me account and revoke control of the data that they've been shared. They can see all the information that's been shared with our partners and who has access to that. So we try to keep it as open and easy to understand. And then we also have made it easy for partners to integrate. Typically, they integrate using SAML, OAuth 2.0, or OpenID Connect to make that identity interoperable across our network. And so really our main goals here are working to reduce the fraud and make it as easy for the end user to verify, and of course, reduce that friction from our partner perspective, not having to manually verify or require that user to come in person if they aren't able to self-verify. But we give not only the ability to choose a policy based on the transaction risks that you think choose a policy that's unique to you based off of your level of assurance that you're requiring, but also have a flexible solution so that if any regulation were to change, maybe you started at a lower level of assurance and then someone released a regulation that requires an IAL2 verification, ID.me could easily step that policy up to ensure compliance. So that is everything from my end. I'll hand it back over to you, Nancy.
Okay, thank you, Celeste. Let's see. So we've talked about the patient record following the patient in our Passio user story, and this is where the complete record travels with the patient from one provider to another, accumulating data along the way. And in this way, the current accurate data is available at each facility, informing care. So now I'll explain how patient share works and why it's important to combine these features with trusted identity. But please also note that trusted identity is a core building block to many of the new FHIR API solutions and use cases. Patient share supports patient-directed exchange, and empowering the patient is really one of the first steps is providing complete access to their own data. If you think of it in 3 stages, so stage 1 might be patient access. So I think everyone has accepted that, and hopefully that will be the law of the land now. Hopefully it'll actually be in place soon. And then stage 2 is allowing the patient to easily share securely. And that's really the focus of patient share. And stage 3, patient involvement, was really engaging the patient in their own care, which we have shown to improve outcomes. And when you think about it from kind of the bigger picture, it really is the patient for whom care is provided. And so that patient really should be available wherever the patient may be treated. One of the pushbacks for this sort of approach that we've heard from time to time is delegation. And so UMA 2 supports delegation. What you can think of there is, instead of the patient creating their own consent, they might delegate that authority to someone else, perhaps their spouse, perhaps an adult child, or it even could be delegated to a care coordinator, somebody who in that community of care might have closer contact with the patient. It supports seamless, immediate access to the right data at the right time. So, so just going through what this looks like in this particular case, our patient Betsy has created 3 different consents, and she's created consents to share with her son Charles, her daughter Deborah, and a provider who provides additional care, that consent becomes the policy that dictates what exchange is allowed. The transparency feature provides insight into when and by whom consents were created and who has accessed what part of Betsy's record. The sample on the right is the more simplistic version of the consent. But really, it's broken out to, they can share at a granular level if they choose to. So they can either choose to share all of their information, or they could choose whatever subset of the information they would like to share. There's a consent term, a duration, and then, of course, it can be revoked at any point in time. And that this same technology can be applied to support sharing sensitive data on a granular level. And you can see this as it's depicted on the right is implemented by the SAMHSA consent to share solution. So it's the same principle, same level of granular sharing supported by HART and UMA, just applied to sensitive data. Users who have been granted permissions have access to shared data at the granular level authorized. So when a provider makes their data available via the new ONC rule, they want to know that it really is the correct patient accessing the data. That is, they want to know that Betsy really is the Betsy we think she is. And when Betsy shares her data with Dr. Bob, she wants to know that Dr. Bob is the Dr. Bob who she thinks he is. I also wanted to point out the differences between authentication and authorization. So when we've been talking about trusted identity, we've been talking about the authentication part. The authorization can still be done at the healthcare facility or whatever node that you want to define that authorization at. And that is separate from authentication. So just kind of keep that in mind. And these trusted identity systems also support authentication by role. This comes into play with the OpenID Connect aspect. So, you might have a role perhaps for a doctor at an ER at a specific hospital. So anybody in that role might be granted permission. We might have a role of emergency responder in a specific community, or maybe roles that have credentials to break the glass. So trusted identity also promotes patient matching. So as a trusted identity providers, ID.me maintains a unique patient identifier referred to as a UUID. If a patient is authenticated by a trusted identity provider at the point of care, that ID can be associated with the patient's medical record and stored in the patient's medical record. Additionally, other key patient attributes are validated to create that high level of trust. If patients always use a trusted identity provider at each point of care, over time, that unique ID would be populated at each care facility. So I want to give you a little bit of idea of how these functional components might work. So in the upper left, we have a trusted identity provider, and the main functions there are identity proofing and trusted authentication. On the right, we have a consent system, such as the one I demonstrated, where Betsy would be recording her consents and sharing preferences. And then on the far left, we have a health data repository. That could be any kind of health data repository. It might be an HIE, an EMR, a portal, a community of care, any kind of health data repository, immunization repository. And then to the lower right, we have, it's basically a FHIR API. It's a server. In this particular case, it's UMA2 enabled in order to be able to support the computable consent. And that's tied together with an authorization server. So when the client requests data, let's say that Betsy's son, Charles, wants to access her list of medications. So the request would go out to the FHIR API. There's a dialogue that goes back and forth. He gets rerouted to the authorization server. They first would need to go to the trusted identity provider and prove that this person is who he says he is. And then the authorization server checks in with the consent server to determine whether or not Betsy has authorized consent for the particular information that he's requested. And when all of the stars align, that FHIR API basically yields the record. All of this is built on pure FHIR APIs. There's nothing really different there. So behind the scenes, the technology can be somewhat complicated to support security, but it's easy from both the user perspective and for developers creating clients. And these functional components are supplied as part of the infrastructure. So this just gives you an idea of, you know, the part that ID.me is providing, patient share, and then the pieces that could be provided by any other facility in the enterprise. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about user workflow. So a user would be identity proof just once. So this can be fully automatic or be organizationally confirmed or someplace in between, as Celeste pointed out. Once they're identity proofed, this identity can be used at multiple locations. And with secure authentication, there's no need for multiple logins or multiple usernames and passwords. Once permissions are in place, that access is immediate. And once it's revoked, the access is immediately denied. So there's a simple, consistent user interface, and that provider burden is eliminated. So I'm going to do a quick demo as well. So let's start over here with Betsy. I'm currently logged in as Betsy, so we can see her consents. And she has created a consent to share with her son, Charles. We'll take a quick look at that. Again, she's chosen to share all of her data. She could share some subset of it. There's a consent term that could be defined or changed or whatever, and it can be revoked at any point in time. And at the same time, Betsy has full, well, I'm logged in as Betsy, she has full access to her complete medical record. So, you know, her, whatever happens to be here, her medications. And of course, this is part of the PASIO group. So we also have the ELTSS care plan. Should be coming up. There we go. The complete ELTSS care plan, in addition to the various assessments that have been collected across the transitions of care. I'm afraid I let this fall asleep today. So we have, you know, mobility, self-care, summaries, etc. Okay, so I'm going to log out. And now I'm going to log back in. In this case, I'm going to, we have the setup for the PASIO demonstration, so we actually have different types of logins. Well, that could be supported. You know, ideally, we would have one authentication server. So at this point, we're going to be logging in with ID.me. And I'm going to be logging in as Charles. So we'll enter his email and his password. So in this particular use case, he's already gone through the identity proofing process. And he has chosen to receive, you know, the code via text. He presses that button, receives the code in his text message, enters it here to confirm, continues. And now he has access to Betsy's data. So again, similar data to what we saw before, you know, vital signs, conditions. And so any changes as Betsy goes across her transitions of care, any changes in Betsy's condition is also available to her son Charles, who, by the way, is also her guardian in this particular use case. So all of these details would be available to him at any point in time. All right. So finish up here. So just in summary, identity proofing benefits. So, you know, a proven user identity at the onset of the relationship. And then it reduces fraud, and you heard a little bit of the anecdote provided by Celeste earlier. It's significant benefits to avoiding that fraud. A unique ID is created and can be leveraged across healthcare systems. Users are identity proof just once, and that certification can be used by other systems. This reduces provider burden, and we're building that bridge to trust. So of course, that was the identity proofing benefits. I'm separating the identity proofing from the federated trusted identity benefits. So this also, this provides the trust that a user is who they say they are. So identity is a tool that establishes trust. We have one set of credentials used everywhere, and that eliminates the need to remember multiple logins and passwords. Can you imagine having this implemented across the healthcare systems and everybody in the United States use the same credentials to access their healthcare data? It also supports authorizations by roles, as we talked about a little while ago. And identity is a requirement for regulatory compliance. In terms of access, when you're verifying a large population of users, that process needs to be easy and trusted. It prevents patient and provider burnout. So we only have to verify that identity one time instead of at each siloed healthcare organization. And it promotes patient matching, using a unique ID as a patient identifier. So do we have any questions?
If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat as well.
Nancy, this is Heather Johnson. I have a question. This is really exciting. The concept of one password, once you put something in, it's used across systems is exciting. I know I forget my passwords all the time. Can you talk a little bit about the security implications and what elevated protections are there? Because there's the possibility that that's breached and it's breached across everything versus if you lose one password or one password's breached, at least it's constrained within one particular instance or one circumstance. It's like that if this was breached, it would be significant. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I wonder if Celeste could actually join me in answering that question. The level of security that's there is so much higher than it is in the systems that folks are currently using today. But Celeste, maybe you could answer that a little better than I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And this sort of comes back to that NIST, adhering to the NIST standards. So IDMe specifically, obviously, we're collecting and storing a lot of sensitive data, personal information. So we are audited annually by government entities as well as the NIST or through Cantera audited, and then also have built-in like security requirements for our systems and solutions. I think that we can definitely dive deeper into like the specifics of how IDMe is secure or how we secure personal information, but just at a high level to understand that we go through constant security audits and updates based off of the highest standards that are put forth.
Yeah, this is Dave Hill. So I think the other thing that's really key is if there is a breach, and I mean, if it's just, and it's, certainly if it's discovered, you can invalidate that identity, and that shuts off everything in one fell swoop. Whereas opposed, if you have a lot of users use the same passwords in a variety of different places. So if you get one password, then you can start trying to get in all these other places. And in that case, you have to go to each one of those places and invalidate the account. Whereas here it's, it's very easy. You just invalidate the ID and then boom, everything's gone.
Yeah, absolutely. And IDMe has built-in fraud protection. Using that UUID, it can track the user's interactions. And so we make sure that there's never any duplicate credentials created for one identity. And then if there's ever suspected fraud, like you said, we can immediately suspend the account. And then also our partners have the ability to suspend accounts as well.
And I think I'd also point out that a lot of information about the identity proofing of the patient is never shared. So the patient has to enter information, and that gets validated against other services during that identity proofing process, so that the information that's getting validated is not shared in itself. And that also goes with some of the approaches using for biometric validations.
Hey, Nancy, it's Ken Harwood, and it might be directed more towards Celeste. Another point that I was concerned about was, is it geographically delineated, meaning that if in fact you were traveling and could you access all your data in another country, and are there then similar additional safeguards when in fact you're traveling or information is coming from other countries in regards to person's health?
That's a great question. So right now, I mean, how IDMe works is that identity or that credential will travel across our network. And currently we're only operating in the US and Canada. We have talked about expanding across to other countries as well, but there's a lot of legal, I guess, hoops and hoops that you have to go through in order to be compliant. So I don't think that there would be a use case right now where I could see an end user needing to verify in a foreign country, but not to say that that's something that would happen in the future.
So we actually have a use case that would require that. So if somebody's traveling, so any of us might be traveling, of course not tomorrow, but under normal conditions, right? And you're, you have an accident in a foreign land, you want to be able to have your health records available at that point of care. So we actually talk about that as one of the use cases that this enables.
Yeah. So
yeah.
If they're looking to log in and access their health records through, your portal or through your patient portal, then obviously they'd be able to do so and through completing that multi-factor authentication. But it wouldn't be something where they go to a health system and create a patient portal, create an account using IDMe through that specific, maybe French patient portal, because we wouldn't have tie into that patient portal specifically.
Yeah. So, but if you had an IDMe account, you could still access your data. You could still be authenticated against IDMe when you're physically located in another country, right?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Nancy and Celeste, a great presentation. This is Chirag Bhatt from FEI, Columbia, Maryland. I just have a quick question for Celeste. Maybe may have missed it, but have you looked into using blockchain for the identity verification? If you look at several use cases for blockchain, identity is one of the key use cases that keeps coming up. So I was just curious if you looked into that.
That's a great question. And I think that would be better for someone on my product team. I know that there's been conversations around that. So I think that might be something that would be happening in the future, but currently right now we're not doing anything with blockchain.
Okay, great. And Nancy, one more clarification I wanted to get from you. You mentioned about consent to share. We work with SAMHSA in developing consent to share. So I was just curious if you had integrated the consent to share engine within patient-centric solution or some other way of applying DS4P.
Yes, so we haven't actually implemented it into ours, but we designed it with that in mind. We were part of that consent to share. As you know, we worked together under SAMHSA when we were working on that project. At the time, though, the SAMHSA requirements and consent to share is what drove adding that sensitive data profile to the heart specifications. So, we wrote the white paper on how that all works. So. It's very clear on how to integrate the work that was done under SAMHSA into this kind of a solution.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? So I think we have 10 minutes back to you, Sima.
Thank you, Nancy. And before we formally end this session, I do just for the record want to say that neither Passio Project nor MITRE were not endorsing any products. We're not showing any kind of favoritism. This was purely an educational session and not a product pitch.